Chapters 17 and 18 of Anybody But Anne by Carolyn Wells. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. 17. The Search for the Pearls. It was a strange sort of gloom that hung over us all at Buttonwood Terrace. It was not exactly sorrow. Indeed, there was little evidence of real grief for David Van Wyck. His children, if they mourned for him, did not do so openly, while his wife seemed stunned rather than saddened. I could not understand Anne. She seemed to pass rapidly from one strange mood to another. Now she would be most anxious to discover the murderer and avenge the crime, and again she would beg of us to discontinue all investigation. Archer watched her closely. It seemed to me he suspected her, and wanted to make sure, but he wanted no one else to suspect her. David Van Wyck had died on Friday night, and the funeral had occurred on Monday. It was now Wednesday, and the inquest would be resumed in a few days. But, to my way of thinking, we had little if any more evidence to go on. Jeanette had explained the stiletto, but who knew if she had told the truth? Doubtless she would lie to shield Anne, for she was devoted to her mistress, and the reason she had given for going away seemed to me far from plausible. Moreover, Anne had expressed no surprise or annoyance at the girl's absence, which I was forced to admit looked as if the mistress had thoroughly understood it. It was on Wednesday morning that I was strolling along the terraces, thinking deeply, when I became aware of voices below me. I glanced down a winding rustic stairway, and saw Anne and Condren Archer. He seemed to be pleading with her, and she looked disturbed and a trifle defiant. I turned away, having no desire to be an eavesdropper, but as I turned, Archer's voice rose in emphatic declaration, and I couldn't help hearing the words. He said, "Anne, I know you took the pearls. Now promise you will marry me some day, and so give me the right to shield and protect you in this trial." The shock of his speech was so great that I involuntarily paused for an instant, and I heard Anne say, "I deny that I took the pearls. If you think I did, you may search for them. I defy you to find them." I hurried away from the spot, suddenly realizing that I was listening, and I am quite willing to confess to a strong desire to listen longer. But this I would not do, partly because my sense of honor forbade it, and also because Anne was the woman I loved, and I would not listen to a word of hers that was not meant for my ears. A moment later I met Barbara and Morland, and they too were talking of the missing pearls. "Don't you think, Mr. Sturgis," said Barbara, "that we ought to make a thorough and systematic search of the house for those pearls before we consider putting the matter in the hands of the police? They represent a fortune in themselves, and I am sure that my father hid them after he had lost control of his mind. It seems to me, then, that they must be somewhere in the study, and we ought to be able to find them." "It can certainly do no harm to search," I responded noncommittally, "but I supposed you had already done so." "We have, in a general way," said Morland. "But Barb means to try to find some secret cupboard or sliding panel hitherto unknown." "I'm with you," I said. "Let's begin at once. Anything is better than doing nothing, and I do think, Morland, that you're making very little effort to solve the whole mystery. If I were you I should call in Fleming Stone." "No!" cried Barbara so sharply that I was surprised. "There is no occasion for such a thing," she went on. "Father killed himself. His mind gave way at the last, and he was not responsible. Also, he hid the pearls, and we can find them. Come on, and let us begin the search. Here are Anne and Mr. Archer. They will help, I'm sure." After listening to Barbara's request, both Anne and Archer heartily agreed to help in a thorough search. We went at once to the study. Markham and Lassiter were already there, and we all went to work with a will. I think I'm safe in saying that no room was ever searched more carefully than the Van Wyck study was that day. We divided it into 2 sections, and each of us searched every section. Mrs. Stelton and Beth Fordyce joined us later, and every possible hiding place was ransacked. Nor was it an easy task. There were many cupboards and desks and odd pieces of furniture with secret drawers. And besides, there were many possible hiding places in the massive and intricate ornamentations. The enormous carved fireplace seemed to mock at us with its possibilities. The carved wainscot and stuccoed wall panels all showed interstices which, though in some cases thick with the dust of time, were large enough to hold a pearl necklace. Anne was perhaps the most energetic of all the searchers. She ran up the spiral staircase to the musicians' gallery and called for someone to come and help her. "For," said she, "this carved railing is simply full of places where anything could be hidden." As I looked up and saw Anne leaning forward with both hands on the balcony rail, I thought I had never seen a more beautiful picture. Whether it was the mere exertion of the search, or the result of some secret knowledge of her own, her cheeks were flushed and her eyes were bright with an unnatural excitement. I ran up the iron staircase myself in response to her invitation, and as no one followed us I drew her back into the shadow of the curtained draperies, and clasping both her hands in mine, I said earnestly, "Anne, you don't know where the pearls are, do you?" Her hands turned cold in mine, and the color died from her cheeks. "How dare you?" she whispered. "What do you mean? What are you implying?" "Nothing," and unable to control myself I clasped her in my arms. But only for a moment, and then, my senses returning, I released her, and said calmly, "I mean nothing, Anne. Forgive me, I lost my head for a moment. But you must know what I shall some day tell you, that I love you, and I shall yet win you. Hush! Don't answer me now. But just remember that I have utter faith in you, and because of that faith I shall probe this whole mystery to its furthest depths. I shall learn the truth, the whole truth, and then, Anne, when it is the proper time, I shall claim you, and you will give yourself to me." I have wondered since how I had the courage to make these statements, for Anne gave me no encouragement. She merely stared at me, her dark eyes seeming to burn like coals of fire in her white face. But as I finished she gave a little despairing sob, and said pitifully, "Oh, Raymond, you don't know. You don't know." And then Beth Fordyce came up to the gallery, and both Anne and I controlled ourselves sufficiently to speak casually as we all continued our search. The gallery was 6 feet wide, and extended across the whole end of the room, except for a space of about 4 feet from either side wall. It rested on 6 enormously heavy brackets, and its railing, about 3 feet high, was also heavy and elaborate. Miss Fordyce looked over the railing in despair. "We never can look into every cranny of those brackets," she said. "We can do it by ladders from below," I returned. "But I will say that I never saw any room so marvelously well provided with hiding places." Anne stood at the end of the gallery, but not the staircase end, and looked at the great cartouche that formed the corner of the cornice, but which was so massive that its lower end was on the level with the gallery. "I can't reach it," she said, stretching out her hand toward its plaster scroll work, "but the pearls could be in any one of those gilded crevices." "And there are 4 of those great ornaments in the room," said I, looking hopelessly around at the cornice. "But if Mr. Van Wyck secreted his jewels in one of them, he must have had a long ladder. And where is the ladder?" "He might have had a rope ladder," suggested Mrs. Stelton, looking self-conscious, as if she had voiced a brilliant idea. "But even so it must be somewhere, and we have found nothing of the sort," I said. Well, the search lasted all the morning without the least result. And to my surprise, after luncheon Mr. Markham proposed that we should search the other rooms of the house. "I have my own reasons for this," he declared, and as this was the first time I had known him to assume the mysterious air which is part of the stock in trade of every self-respecting detective, I began to hope his reasons might be sound ones. No one was enthusiastic about a further search, but all agreed to it, except Anne. She declared that the privacy of her own rooms should not be invaded, and she refused to allow search to be made in them. At this I saw Archer looking at her intently. I saw Anne flush with anger and dismay, and I saw Mr. Markham alertly observing both. "It is a mere matter of form, Mrs. Van Wyck," he said, "but I must insist upon it. And of course you must see that to close your rooms to our search would look—" He hesitated. Even he could not voice the implication he was about to make, in the face of Anne's scorn. "That will do," she said coldly, and at once led the way to her own apartments. Her bedroom, dressing room, and bathroom were subjected to a search, but on the part of most of us it was perfunctory and superficial. Except the detective, not one of us was willing to open the cupboards, boxes, or bureau drawers. But Mr. Markham darted here and there, opening drawers, boxes, and baskets, one after another. I chanced to be sitting by a table on which was a gilded Florentine chest, which was locked. Markham demanded the key, and Anne gave it to him. But the chest was entirely empty, save for several old photographs carelessly flung in. Disappointed, the detective stared thoughtfully about the room. "You must understand, Mrs. Van Wyck," he said smoothly, "that we have no suspicion, but at the same time we must make this search a thorough one. And I think we have examined everything except the bookshelves. I must ask now that the books be taken down." The bookshelves, which were built against the wall, covered nearly all one side of the room. At Mr. Markham's orders the books were taken down, 3 or 4 at a time, and returned to their places; but although there was plenty of space behind them, no pearls were discovered. "Shall we open each book?" inquired Mr. Archer sarcastically. "No," said the detective shortly. "Pearls could not be placed in a book, but they could easily be behind them, and I must do my duty." The others had helped with the bookshelf performance, but I had stayed near Anne. She was trembling like a leaf. If she had hidden the pearls behind the books and feared their discovery, she could not have been more nervously agitated. I noticed, too, that Archer was watching her closely, even while he was busily engaged in taking down and putting back the volumes. In an effort to distract Anne's attention, and perhaps to calm her unrest, I said, "How did you like the vase I brought you?" and I glanced at it where it stood on a small side table. "It is beautiful," she said, and thanked me with her eyes. "I have never seen a more exquisite piece of Venetian glass. But so very fragile. I would not let any one but myself touch it to unpack it, and even then I was afraid it would break while I was disengaging it from its wrappings. I was frightened, Raymond, lest Mr. Van Wyck should see it. He was so absurdly jealous that it would have made him very angry. But now it doesn't matter." Her lip quivered, and a strange look came into her eyes, but I was positive it was not regret that she no longer had to endure her husband's jealousy. At last Markham declared himself satisfied that the pearls were not in Anne's apartments, and, followed by his assistants, he went to search David Van Wyck's rooms. And from there the search continued all over the rest of the rooms, and it was well on towards sundown before he was ready to declare himself satisfied that the pearls were not hidden in any part of the house. "And so," said Mr. Markham, with an air of finality, "we may be sure that Mr. Van Wyck did not hide the pearls, nor are they in the possession of any member of this household. This, I think, proves that the robbery was committed by an intruder, who also killed Mr. Van Wyck. The mystery of how the burglar entered, and what weapon he used, will, I fear, never be solved." "And the missing deed?" asked Archer. "That is another mystery that seems inexplicable. Of course the fortune now remains in possession of the family, and will be disposed of according to the terms of Mr. Van Wyck's will." The will, as everybody knew, left David Van Wyck's 3 heirs each in possession of 1/3 of his fortune. The pearls were not mentioned in the will, although Anne claimed he had verbally given them to her. Both Barbara and Morland disputed her ownership of them, but as the pearls were gone it made little difference whose they were. "I can't help thinking, Mr. Markham," I said, "that we have all reached the end of our ingenuity. But I also think that the problem ought not to be given up, and that it is now time to call in a more expert investigator. I propose, therefore, that we send for Fleming Stone and put the matter in his hands." "Oh, that wonderful Mr. Stone!" exclaimed Mrs. Stelton, clapping her hands in her foolish way. "Send for him, do. He can tell us everything." "I, for one, do not wish him sent for," said Anne in a most positive manner. "Nor I," said Barbara, for once agreeing with her stepmother. "I don't think we need him," said Morland thoughtfully. "What could he find out more than we have?" "We haven't found out anything," I retorted, "and he would explain everything in a short time." "Is he, then, omniscient?" said Mr. Markham, with a decided sneer. "He is very nearly so in matters of detective work," I returned gravely. "If Mrs. Van Wyck does not wish to employ him, I will do so myself, as I am quite willing to admit that I have a strong desire to solve the mysteries of David Van Wyck's death and of the stolen jewels and missing deed." We discussed at some length the question of sending for Fleming Stone, but so strong was the opposition of the Van Wycks, of the detective, and of Condren Archer, that I forbore to insist, and the matter was left unsettled. But later I discussed it alone with Archer. "Don't do it," he said to me earnestly. "Don't you see that to get Stone here might implicate Anne?" "Why?" said I in surprise. "My motive in getting him would be to prove Anne's innocence." "Then if you want to prove Anne Van Wyck innocent, or even to continue to think her so, don't send for Stone." And with these words Archer turned on his heel and left me. I went to the study, hoping to find Morland there, and to persuade him to agree to my views. But there was no one in the study except the secretary. "Mr. Lassiter," I said to him, "as man to man, won't you explain to me why you and Morland persist in these conflicting stories?" "My story is the true one," said Lassiter, looking me squarely in the eye. "When I left the room that night, Morland sat here," indicating a large carved seat near the fireplace, "and Mr. Van Wyck was at his desk. It all occurred as I related at the inquest. And, Mr. Sturgis, I will tell you what I have not told anyone else. After going out of the door, I went around the study and halfway down the front path to the road. Then, on an impulse which I cannot explain, I turned back and went and looked in at the study window, not the door, but the window at the farther end. And I distinctly saw Morland bending over his father's desk. Of course, at that time I had no thought of tragedy, and I hoped that father and son would make up their quarrel then and there. I merely glanced in, and turning away again, went straight home." "Why didn't you tell of this at the inquest?" "Because, though it would, in a way, prove my story, in the face of the tragedy I feared it might make things look black for Morland." "You don't suspect him of any wrongdoing?" "No, I can't. But it is all mysterious, and I agree with you in wishing that we could have the great Fleming Stone look into it." "Why, I thought you didn't want him." "Personally, I do. But Miss Van Wyck is so opposed to the idea I should rather defer to her wishes than insist upon my own." "Oh, I see. I didn't understand before." "Yes," said Lassiter, frankly. "Although we're not formally engaged, I hope to make Barbara Van Wyck my wife. And so you see I cannot endorse a course of action to which she is so definitely opposed." This was true enough, and I told him so. I couldn't help liking Lassiter, and some things about him which I had thought strange were explained by what he had just told me. From him I went straight to Morland. "Tell me," I said to him in a confidential way, "why did you and Lassiter contradict each other at the inquest?" "I wondered you didn't ask me that long ago," he said, seeming not at all offended. "You see, it is this way. I was sitting on that old bench by the fireplace. But it is in a dark corner, and I was in a shadow, for after the committee left we had turned off some of the lights, and the shaded desk light and the firelight made pretty much all the illumination there was. I was tired and discouraged with the whole matter, and I left the room quietly, just before 12, without even saying good night. Father and Lassiter were talking, and I don't believe they heard me go. So when Lassiter said good night to me, as he says he did, he really thought I was there, and if father spoke to me, why, he must have thought so, too." This was all plausible enough, and the young man's frank manner convinced me of its truth. But there was another point to be cleared up. "All right, Morland," I said. "That does explain things. You left the room just before midnight, and a moment or two later Lassiter went home and said good night to you, thinking you were there. But a little later still you returned." "What?" cried Morland, and he turned fairly livid with rage. "What do you mean, Sturgis?" "What do you mean by getting so excited over it? You did return, and you were seen." "By whom?" "Never mind that now." Morland looked straight at me. There was fear in his eyes, but there was also a strong ring of truth in his voice as he said: "Sturgis, if I returned to the study, and if I was seen there, then the one who saw me is the murderer. Send for your Fleming Stone, and discover who it may be." Without another word Morland strode away, leaving me completely bewildered by his words. 18. Fleming Stone arrives. When I went to my room to dress for dinner, I thought the matter over very definitely before deciding to send for Stone. It was a somewhat radical move on my part, and I was not sure that I was entirely justified, but I felt I must clear Anne of any possible breath of suspicion. And as I was unable to do this by myself, I wanted the best possible assistance I could find. And yet everybody was opposed to the coming of the great detective. I felt sure that Barbara didn't want him to come because she suspected the guilt of either her brother or the secretary. I could see this from the way in which she looked at both men, and from some slight hints she had inadvertently dropped in conversation. And since it seemed to be fairly well proven that Morland Van Wyck and Barclay Lassiter were the last two people known to be with David Van Wyck, then one was in a way justified in suspecting one or both of these men. And Barbara, fearful that Fleming Stone's coming would mean disaster to her brother or her lover, naturally protested against it. Condren Archer had said frankly that he didn't want Stone to come lest he might implicate Anne. And when I remembered Anne's various inexplicable actions, and especially her agitation during the search in her room, I too trembled to think what Fleming Stone's investigations might disclose. Markham, the detective, I knew, didn't want Stone, but that I ascribed to a petty professional jealousy. Of course the two detectives were not to be mentioned on the same day of the week, but Markham in his ignorance considered himself quite the peer of Stone. But, on the other hand, Lassiter, I knew, really wanted Stone, and only refrained from saying so out of consideration for Barbara. This to me was a fair proof of Lassiter's own innocence. And indeed, no breath of real suspicion had fallen on the secretary, except the general fact that he had had opportunity to steal the pearls, had he been inclined to do so. But what had brought my inclinations to a positive decision was the fact that Morland had said to send for Fleming Stone. He said it in the heat of passion and under the influence of anger, but he had said it, and I decided to consider that as authority. So I concluded to write at once, before Morland could retract his permission. I made a rapid toilette, and found I had time enough left before dinner to write my letter. It was not an easy matter, for I was not one of the principals in the case, and I didn't wish to tell Stone of my hopes regarding Anne. But I wrote a straightforward account of everything, and I begged him to come at once. I told him frankly that most of the household were opposed to his coming, but that Morland had sanctioned it, and if there were ever any question of authority, I would assume all the responsibility of having asked him, and would also be held responsible for the financial settlement. As I wrote, my mind became more firmly made up that I was doing right. I could never marry Anne while she was under this cloud, and even should she refuse to marry me, I must free her from any taint of suspicion regarding her husband's death. Of Archer's hint that Stone's coming might convict Anne of the crime I resolutely took no notice. If I could believe such a thing of the woman I loved, I would be utterly unworthy of her. But I wrote nothing of all this to Stone. I told him the simple facts of the case as I knew them. I told him the indications and evidences as I knew them, and I must admit that it did seem a tangle. I felt that we had been either stupid or inefficient in our endeavors to unravel the mystery, for they certainly had led nowhere. All suspicion of any person fell to the ground before the undeniable fact of that sealed room. And all suspicion of suicide fell to the ground in the absence of any weapon. Truly, it was a case worthy of Fleming Stone's attention, and I hoped with all my heart he would take it up. With the thought of helping him to understand it all, I wrote him everything we had done. I told of Jeanette's disappearance, of the hidden stiletto, and of her subsequent explanation. I told him of our exhaustive search for the pearls, and I told him, too, though I hated to, how nervous and agitated Anne was when we searched her bookshelves. And then I told him, though I fully realized that all these things pointed in one direction, of the last words David Van Wyck said to his wife as he left the drawing-room. How he had told her he was going to give away the pearls she looked upon as her own, and how he had said, "Now don't you wish I were dead?" I admitted to him that Anne was very strongly opposed to the munificent gift her husband had intended making, but stated also that the disappearance of the deed was quite as favorable to the wishes of the two stepchildren as to those of the wife. I told Fleming Stone all this, and I told him, too, that I believed Anne Van Wyck innocent, but for this belief I could give no reason. That letter went off Wednesday night. I sent it to the permanent address in New York which Stone had given me, though of course I had no means of knowing whether he was there or not. But by good fortune he was in New York, and he replied to my letter at once, so that late Thursday afternoon I received his reply. To my satisfaction, he declared himself willing to undertake the case, and incidentally complimented me on the clearness of my account and the definiteness of my written details. He said he would arrive Friday morning, and he begged me to keep the room from being disturbed any further. "Though I dare say," he wrote, "that by this time all possible clues are removed or destroyed through ignorance or carelessness. However, lock up the room at once, and let no one enter it until I get there." This instruction was scarcely necessary, for the study had had few occupants since the tragedy. Everybody avoided the place, and the servants could scarcely be induced to enter it. I knew it had not been swept or dusted since the fatal night, and I hoped that Stone's marvelous powers could find clues where we had seen none. To be sure, we had searched it thoroughly for the pearls, and no one of us had then found anything in the way of evidence. But we were not trained observers, and I had great hopes of Stone's wizardry. After dinner I walked on the terrace with Anne. I had announced at the dinner table that I had written for Fleming Stone, and that I had done this with Morland's consent. I glanced at Morland as I said this, but he made no response beyond a slight affirmative nod. There was a silence after my announcement, and then Mrs. Stelton began to babble, and Beth Fordyce began a rapturous eulogy of Fleming Stone and his work. But the others said nothing, either for or against the coming of the detective. As we walked on the terrace I tried to draw Anne out on the subject. But she only said wearily, "It doesn't matter. It would have to come out some time, I suppose. Shall you mind, Raymond, when your friend Stone proves me a criminal?" "I don't think he will do that, Anne," I said very gently, for I couldn't think it, and yet her despairing tone alarmed me more than if she had been angry or deeply disturbed. And then the others joined us and the conversation became general. But seemingly by tacit consent, the subject of the crime or the coming of the new detective was not touched upon. Even Mrs. Stelton seemed to feel the restraint that was upon us all, and for once refrained from making her usual flippant and ill-timed observations. The party broke up early, and we all went to our rooms. The men did not congregate in the smoking room as usual, but parted on the landing with brief good nights. I, for one, felt heavy of heart. Anne's definite speech had frightened me, and I wondered if in sending for Stone I had precipitated the very calamity I wished to avert. But it was too late now for regret. I had put the matter in other hands, and I must abide by the consequences. And yet, though I could still hope for Anne's innocence, though my heart still whispered, "Anybody but Anne," I was far from having the same confidence that I had felt earlier in the day. The next morning Fleming Stone came. The moment I saw him I was glad I had summoned him. He looked so strong, so capable and so resourceful, that I knew instinctively he would reach the truth. And after all, it was the truth we wanted, or ought to want. We congregated in the drawing room to meet him, and his reception was more like that of an honored guest than an official detective. He greeted each one individually and with the utmost cordiality and kindness. But after a few polite commonplaces of conversation, he rose alertly and declared himself ready to begin the business at hand. "I assume I have the freedom of the house," he said, turning to Anne, who responded merely by a bow. She was frightened, I could see that, and yet there was nothing in Fleming Stone's manner to inspire alarm. Indeed, he looked at her with an intent admiration, as he had done on his former visit, and I realized that he would give her every possible benefit of doubt. "I shall go to the study first," he said, "and I should like to be accompanied only by Mr. Sturgis and Mr. Markham. After my investigations there, I may want to ask some questions of the rest of you." I wanted to feel that Stone was taking me with him because I might be of some assistance, but this vain hope was quickly shattered. "I want you with me, Mr. Sturgis," he said as we entered the study and he closed the door, "first because you are my employer, and also because you are the only one of this household who cannot possibly be implicated in this crime." I suppose I looked my amazement, for he went on, "That does not mean that all the rest are implicated, but you are the only one who I know is not." "How do you know that, Mr. Stone?" "First, from the letter you wrote me, which leaves you free of suspicion, while it leaves every one else open to the possibility of it. Second, because you had no motive for the deed. But I—" "You needn't finish. I know you are deeply attracted to Mrs. Van Wyck, but you would not murder her husband in order to win her, and then send for me to come out here to discover the criminal." "No, I wouldn't," I replied, almost smiling at the way he put it. "And now, Mr. Stone, if I can help you in any way, I shall be only too glad." "I think I shall not require help, thank you. I ask only freedom from interruption, and, possibly, answers to occasional questions." If the words were a trifle curt, the tone was not at all so, and I willingly sat down, content to watch the great man at his work. Mr. Markham also watched Stone intently, and even offered suggestions now and then. But these Stone dismissed with a mere word or two, often with only a wave of his hand. As I had surmised he would do, he scrutinized every part of the room. At first with sweeping glances, and then focusing his attention on various details. I had told him in my letter of the security with which the room was locked and bolted on the inside, and he examined all the fastenings of the doors and windows with utmost care and interest. "I think I can safely say," he remarked, "that I have never seen a room apparently so absolutely impossible of ingress. And yet some one entered and left while it was thus bolted and barred. It was not a suicide, then? Certainly not. It was a case of wilful murder. Committed by an intruder? Yes, by an intruder of exceeding cleverness, of marvelously cool nerve, and—" "And of great physical strength," I prompted. "Not necessarily," said Stone, looking sharply at me. "I don't deduce especial strength." I felt ashamed, for I realized in a sudden flash that I had said that hoping to learn that his thoughts were not directed toward Anne. "What did this intruder do with the weapon he used?" I stammered, partly to hide my confusion. "He left it behind him, in plain view of every one. I fear, Mr. Sturgis, you are unobservant." "Wait a moment," I cried, stung by his evident scorn of what we had done, or rather, what we had failed to do. "Do you mean to tell me that the weapon is even now in this room?" "It is, and in plain sight." "Don't tell me where. Let me find it for myself," I cried, gazing wildly around. "Find it if you can. But as you have overlooked it all these days, how can you expect to see it now?" "I'm completely mystified," I said. "We searched this room so carefully for the pearls that I would have sworn we must have found a weapon had there been any to find. Show it to me, Mr. Stone. There it is," and Fleming Stone pointed quietly to a bill file which stood on the desk. It was of the ordinary type, with a heavy bronze standard and a long, sharp, upright spike. The bills and papers on it reached nearly to the top, but as soon as my attention was drawn to it, I realized that with the bills removed it would indeed be a deadly weapon, and would correspond in every way to the weapon which the doctor declared must have been used. "I can only suppose," I said, "that it escaped our attention because of its very obviousness." "Not only that," said Stone, "but it was inconspicuous, being nearly covered with the bills. And, moreover, you looked only for a definite weapon, and not for an ordinary implement used as one. How did you come to notice it so quickly? Because you had told me no weapon could be found, with the exception of the possible stiletto. And that did not greatly impress me, for no one would leave evidence of a crime in so simple a hiding place. Even now I believe that bill file to be the criminal's weapon only because I can discover no other. But let us look at it. If we find a particle of blood stain on the papers, I think we may have no further doubt." Fleming Stone carefully lifted the bills from the metal rod that pierced them. Drawing a lens from his pocket, he examined the bill file and several of the papers. "It was used to kill Mr. Van Wyck," he declared. "It was carefully wiped off and the bills returned to it. The particles of blood remaining on it are scarcely perceptible to the naked eye, but may clearly be seen through the magnifying glass. You may perceive also some faint stains around the holes in the papers where they slid down the spike. As this is vital evidence, I will put it safely away." Fleming Stone put the file with its papers in a small cupboard of the desk, which he locked, and then took out the key. After that, for a long time, Markham and I sat silently watching him as he proceeded with his scrutiny of the room. Occasionally he examined something through his glass, occasionally he picked up a scrap of something from the floor and put it in his notebook or pocket. At last I could contain myself no longer, and I burst out with, "Mr. Stone, do you know how the murderer got in and out?" "I do not," he replied. "I haven't the faintest idea. But since a human being did do so, another human being may discover how." I felt that he was avoiding the masculine pronoun on purpose, and again my heart sank, as I feared for Anne. After an hour or so, though it seemed ages, Fleming Stone declared his investigation of the room completed, and announced his desire to see next some of the servants. I took him across the house to the kitchen quarters, and in the butler's pantry we found a footman and 2 maids. After a quick glance at the faces of the trio, Mr. Stone interrogated the more intelligent looking of the maids. "When express packages arrive," he said to her in his pleasant way, "who attends to them?" "A footman, sir," said the girl, with an air of proud importance at being questioned. "What footman? This one?" "Yes, sir. That's Jackson, sir. He most always takes the express parcels." "Ah, then you can speak for yourself, Jackson. On the day of your master's death, did any express parcels arrive?" "Yes, sir," replied Jackson. "I remember there were 3 came that morning." "What was in them?" "Supplies for the pantry, sir. Mostly bottles and jars, sir." "And what were they packed in? Excelsior?" "Yes, sir. Excelsior and straw." "And was there no other parcel, containing china or glass?" "There was another, sir, but not by express. Mr. Sturgis brought it. That was glass, and it was taken to Mrs. Van Wyck's room." Fleming Stone turned to me. "What was the packing, Mr. Sturgis?" he said. "I don't know," I replied, greatly mystified at this turn of affairs. "I brought a glass vase as a gift to Mrs. Van Wyck, but she opened the box when I was not present." "I emptied the box, sir," volunteered Jackson, "and it was full of tissue paper cut into little scraps." "Yes, of course," agreed Stone. "That is what a fine piece of glass would naturally be packed in. That is all. Thank you, Jackson." Slowly and thoughtfully Stone walked back through the house. He detained me a moment as we passed through the dining room. "You want me to go on with the case, Mr. Sturgis?" he said. "Wherever the results may lead?" I shuddered at this question, coming right on top of his discovery of Anne's glass vase. I could see no possible connection between my innocent gift and the Van Wyck tragedy, but there must have been one in Stone's mind. However, I replied, "Yes," knowing that I must know the truth, whatever it might be. End of chapters 17 and 18.